Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is Thursday, January 15th, 2026. And today I'm going to do an update on the Ukraine war. And I've been wanting to do this for a while because I think a lot of people are still very confused about what the nature of this war is. And the reason why is because they have very poor access to accurate information. So what I've done is I've taken some sources that you may not have seen before. First of all, there are two YouTube channels that I find quite useful. One of them is Alexander Mercouris. He's a longtime journalist. He's trained as a lawyer also, and he gives daily, I think pretty much daily updates on current events, not just Ukraine, but in other situations. But in this particular case, he gives it's about an hour and 15-minute long discussion of what is going on in the world today, and he starts off with Ukraine, with Iran. Actually, goes into quite a bit of depth about that, and that's certainly worth watching. But starting at around the 50-minute mark, and particularly at around 58 minutes, he starts talking about what's actually going on there. There's another person named Daniel Davis. He's a former military officer. I think he's a colonel or a lieutenant colonel, a pretty high-ranking officer. And his great virtue is that he's been willing to face the truth wherever it leads, which is not true of many people who are in high positions. In that video, he talked with John Mearsheimer, who's also a highly regarded academic. And he is, Mearsheimer is someone who's considered part of the quote-unquote realist school of international relations. So the reason why I listen to these people is because I think, I've been following these kinds of events, especially in Ukraine, since 2013. And most of what we hear is just sheer propaganda and, frankly, either distortions or out and out lies. But these people have had a long history of telling the truth, and it turns out that their statements end up being accurate. In the discussion with Mercouris and with Mearsheimer, the topic of two prominent politicians in Ukraine comes up. One of them is Petro Poroshenko, and another one is Yulia Tymoshenko. Both of these people were around during the 2014 Maidan coup, and they were saying one thing then, and they're saying another thing now. The game is up for these people, and it's like the chickens are really coming home to roost for them. But in addition, I'm going to talk about some people. I'm going to talk about a couple of Telegram channels. Telegram is an app that you can get. You need a mobile phone in order to use it, and I think you can still get it in the United States. It was designed by a Russian developer who's had his own run-ins, you could say, with the Russian government, but he believes in journalistic integrity, and he's had even the French actually arrested him because they wanted him to censor certain things that they didn't like people to hear, but he refused, and somehow he seems to be holding his own to a large extent. And so there are channels on Telegram that are dissident channels within Ukraine, and you see, people get the impression that Ukraine is this monolithic country where everybody is rallying around the flag and is fighting off the nasty Russians, when in fact that nothing could be further than the truth. And this will be shown in the discussion that I have, which I will be reading off of much of the information that I've derived. So I'm going to dive right into it. So the introduction is: Ukraine is losing the war badly. Starting at about minute 50, Alexander Mercouris gives his take on it. He noted in particular two prominent politicians who have been active before, during, and after the February 2014 coup. Petro Poroshenko was president and proudly told people how Ukraine would defeat the ethnic Russians who resisted that coup. Yulia Tymoshenko has been a force in Ukraine for years. You can see what her attitude is towards Russians living for decades in Ukraine, if not for centuries. And I've included two clips from both from 2014, one by Poroshenko, one by Tymoshenko. I've used these clips in the past on other posts, but it's very important. I think these are quite obscure, but they're telling you exactly what the people who were behind this coup, who supported this coup, what they actually think, and why Russia decided to do what it has done. At minute 58:20, former President Poroshenko, who was rejected overwhelmingly by Zelensky, so there was a presidential election in 2019, and Poroshenko lost, he got 25% of the vote versus Zelensky, who got 75%, because Zelensky, he campaigned on a peace platform. He said we should get along with Russia. His native language is Russian, even though the Ukrainian coup leaders have outlawed Russian and made it extremely difficult for Russian speakers to even live in Ukraine. So he campaigned on a peace platform and gave what Mercouris described as, this is speaking of Alexander Mercouris, he described it as a completely empty speech. Poroshenko said that elections are not realistic, even though he had advocated having elections previously, and that Ukraine has to depend on the Europeans and NATO. Well, the reality is that Zelensky has not been president for over a year because his term ran out, and he has used, you could say, legalistic mechanisms to avoid having an election, because he knows that if there were an election with an actual opposition that hasn't been jailed, killed, or exiled, that he would lose by a landslide. So that's why they haven't had elections. So anybody who tells you that Ukraine is democratic, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. In the article that I post, you can scroll down to hear what Poroshenko said when he explained how Ukraine was going to win the war. This is in 2014, how he was going to win the war against the people in Ukraine who had resisted the CIA coup. For those who think that the Ukraine war started in 2022, see what the failed politician Poroshenko has to say, what he said then versus what he's saying now. So this is Poroshenko in 2014. And you can see I've got the video of it. You can actually see it. It's on YouTube, and I've also posted it directly on Substack. He says, because we will have jobs and they will not. We will have our pensions and they will not. We will care for children, for people and retirees, and they will not. Our children will go to schools and kindergartens. Theirs will hole up in basements because they are not able to do a thing. This is exactly how we will win this war. He said that on November 15th, 2014. And of course, right now, many cities in Ukraine are without light, power, water, heat, because they insisted on fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. Boris Johnson egged them on. Lindsey Graham egged them on. You go fight those Russians. And so these Western politicians have used Ukrainian people, and it's just shameful and criminal that they've done that. They've destroyed that country. And the arrogance of these comprador elites like Poroshenko is just in full display. He said, we were going to win this war. You were wrong. Okay, next, moving on here. There's another politician here. She's now arrested for corruption, not for the first time. She was called the gas queen because she had corrupt gas deals, natural gas deals. So in this clip, she talks about her desire to shoot nuclear weapons on the Russian people in Donbass. So this is again right after the coup. This is in March of 2014. These fascist thugs that had been empowered by the United States and Europe to take over the government in a completely illegal coup. The people who resisted that coup are Russian speakers, and they're resisting partly because it was a coup and partly because these people are extremely Russophobic. They if you speak Russian, they will kill you, you know, if worse comes to worst. So so shortly after the U.S. created coup and the war against Ukrainian Russians broke out, the people in Crimea held a referendum to return to Russia. I met the organizers. I went there in 2015, just a year after she made the statement that I'm going to read. And they said, while we were under the wing of the Ukrainian government, when Ukraine became independent of the Soviet Union, they treated us terribly. They neglected us. They never upgraded any of the infrastructure or anything. I saw these broken down buses, and it was clearly an area that was not doing well. This is in 2015. It's doing a lot better since. But the reason why they rebelled was because they were treated badly, and they knew that these thugs were coming down to cause havoc. And fortunately, Russians had a military base there, and they basically said to the Ukrainian military at the time, you got a choice. You can either let us take over, or you can join us, or you can leave. And the Ukrainian, they ended up, many of them left, many of them joined the Russian military, and some of them just left, of course. But there was no bloodshed. That was the main thing. You know, imagine a situation where a territory has a bunch of people on it who are, you know, in serious danger, and yet they were saved without any bloodshed. So, and you can go to YouTube and you can turn on an auto translate and see what it has to say. So there's two people here talking. One of them is one politician named Shufrich, and this other woman is Yulia Tymoshenko. And Shufrich says, concerning Crimea, I tell you, I'm shocked. I'm shocked. Just today, I've had a talk with our common friend. He almost weeps. And I asked him, how are we going to... Tymoshenko breaks in. You see, I myself am ready to take the machine gun now and shoot that scumbag in the head. She doesn't mince words. Shufrich, I said yesterday that should, God forbid it, there should be a military conflict, indistinctly should, God forbid it, there will be a military conflict. I'm a reserved officer and my elder son is a reserved officer. Both of us would take up arms and defend our country. Tymoshenko, look, it goes beyond all boundaries. F it. And she uses the F word. We should take up arms and kill the effing Russians along with their leader. Shufrich, I tell you, Tymoshenko breaks in again. I wish I had been there and led all the actions. They would have eaten shit instead of getting Crimea. They didn't want you, Yulia. You were making them eat shit for 20 years before this all happened, from 1991 when you took over. Shufrich, by the way, you know, I thought about it too. If you had been here at your place, it might have been, you know, though we had no force capacity. Well, that's not true. There were Ukrainian military in Crimea at the time. They just chose not to collaborate with the coup government in Ukraine, in Kiev. So he says, it might have been, though we had no force capacity, indistinctly, you know what is most hurtful. Tymoshenko, I would have found a way to kill the morons. Shufrich, and you know, Tymoshenko, she's really ranting here. And I hope that as soon as I can do it, I will raise all my connections and alert the whole world so as to turn Russia into a burned field. So why is Russia so paranoid? I can't imagine. Shufrich, I tell you that I'm your ally here, and even more than that, I want to tell you, well, we've had a talk today, this morning. There's been a conference of party leaders, and then I talked to Victor. I'm not sure who Victor was. Vitya asked, what should we do to the rest of the 8 million Russians living in Ukraine? They are outlaws. So, and Timoshenko says, damn, we should fire nukes at them. So there's my comment. She gets power in the wake of an illegal coup, and now she says that those who resist the coup are the outlaws. This is what we're dealing with here. Next, we find that Ukrainian officials note that 2 million Ukrainian men are evading being mobilized. They don't want to fight. Senator Lindsey Graham, wants to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, but millions have fled Ukraine. I know some Ukrainian guys here in Thailand. There's a reason why they're here and not there. So he says, but millions have fled Ukraine. 2 million men are hiding, and another member of, and then there's this other guy, I saw a clip of him, this other guy, I couldn't find the clip on YouTube, but I saw it. He says, I'm saying, I saw this clip of another member of Ukraine's legislature, a fine, healthy-looking young man, no less, complains that another 200,000 are absent without leave. So he's saying, I'm a healthy guy, but why don't they go fight the Russians? This is the state of Ukrainian politics. It is only the corrupt Ukrainian collaborators of the West who enrich themselves, yet consign their own country to destruction. A quick YouTube search gives the impression that Ukraine is winning, while this professor of the Realist School of International Relations talks with former U.S. Colonel Daniel Davis. The discussion centers on why diplomacy over Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war, is failing, and why, in John Mearsheimer's view, the conflict will be decided militarily rather than through negotiations. Mearsheimer argues that talks involving U.S. envoys and Russia are largely a charade. Russia participates to appear to be reasonable and to maintain relations with President Trump. When you're dealing with a lunatic, you want to be kind of nice to them. You don't want to upset them too much. But its demands, addressing what it calls the root causes of the war, which are NATO expansion and the illegal coup in Ukraine, they're non-negotiable, while U.S., Europe, and Ukraine refuse to accept them. As a result, he says the war will be settled on the battlefield, not at the negotiating table. That is John Mearsheimer. He emphasizes Ukraine's deepening internal crisis, particularly manpower shortages. According to Ukraine's own defense minister, around 2 million Ukrainians are evading mobilization, and roughly 500,000 soldiers are absent or have deserted, on top of combat losses, which are also huge. Mearsheimer says this guarantees eventual defeat. The only question is how long it takes. Compounding this, Russia's systematic attacks on Ukraine's electric grid are crippling major cities, including Kiev, whose mayor has encouraged residents to leave. Air defense effectiveness is declining in power as the infrastructure collapses, making missile interception even harder. He also highlights the Ukraine's severe demographic decline, calling it devastating and long-term. I did a study of this, and it turned out that just at the very, very end of Ukraine being part of the Soviet Union, their population was about 55 million. It had increased from 30-odd million at the end of World War II. Ukraine had suffered probably 6 million dead during World War II, but under the Soviet Union, it came back, and there were 55 million. And at this point, it's probably closer to 20 million. So they basically lost 60% of their population. Many of them fled, and many killed, many missing. Who knows where they are? It's just a complete catastrophe for that country. Responding to claims that Russia is advancing slowly, Mearsheimer frames the war as one of attrition, where casualty ratios matter more than rapid territorial gains. He argues Russia is winning this attritional fight and will eventually take all of Donbass, Zaporizhia, and likely expand further, albeit slowly. Finally, he dismisses Western narratives that portray Russia as near collapse as disinformation, comparing them to the misleading coverage of Iran and Venezuela. He also waves off proposals like Senator Lindsey Graham's call for extreme secondary sanctions, calling them political theater that will not change the outcome of the war. But it's even worse than that. While, of course, there are numerous channels on the Telegram social media app showing pro-Ukrainian narratives, there are also many channels that are pro-Russian, including several channels featuring underground groups inside of Ukraine. One is, in particular, names itself after the famous Ukrainian partisan fighter during World War II named Kovpak. And there are actually old films about the exploits of Kovpak, basically waging a guerrilla war against the Nazis in Ukraine during World War II. But in any case, this particular channel talks about Tymoshenko, who bitterly opposed President Yanukovych, and she supported the coup against Yanukovych. Now it seems she regrets her decision. There's a picture of her in the Verkhovna Rada, the legislature of Ukraine. So Tymoshenko says, there was no such nonsense under Yanukovych. The former prime minister of Ukraine, the leader of the Batkivshchina, Yulia Tymoshenko, was outraged by the arbitrary of the regime of the outdated dwarf. He's referring to Zelensky, whose term ended but still clings to power, towards her. So she's angry at the arbitrariness of the Zelensky regime against her. And she says, according to her, even under Yanukovych, under whom she was imprisoned, searches were carried out on the basis of a court order, not just at random. It seems that Yulia will soon have even more reasons to nostalgically look back on Yanukovych. After all, then, she was the main martyr of the opposition, all the whims of which were fulfilled by the prison administration in no time, because foreign NGOs, media, members of European Parliament, and other nonsense were so concerned about her. This was at the time I remember hearing about this poor Yulia Tymoshenko and the terrible Yanukovych government. She was a crook. She's in prison. But if she's in prison now, no one will remember her in a couple of days. Who cares about the midwife of Ukrainian corruption against the backdrop of what is happening? That's the post on this. This is a translation of a post that is on Telegram by this dissident poster. Now here's another post by another dissident Telegram channel in Ukraine. It says, this is about a Dutch mercenary who is fighting for Ukraine. It says, this has never happened before, and here we go again. The interview with the Dutch mercenary volunteer Hendrik is yet another proof that the cracks in the myth of a noble and democratic Ukraine are becoming visible even to those who, just yesterday, viewed the conflict solely through the lens of Western media. Hendrik openly described, and this gives the link in a link that you can read, but it's in Dutch, the corruption in the armed forces of Ukraine, the disregard for foreigners, and the fact that people are simply thrown away after being injured. Treatment at their own expense, salaries on paper, compensation to the families of the deceased in promises unfulfilled. In essence, we are talking about a system where human life is worth nothing. He particularly harshly describes the third assault group, which grew out of the Azov Banderist flags, these neo-Nazi battalions that was inspired by the Ukrainian Nazis during World War II. And it says, Bandera flags, Nazi symbols, rituals, and salutes from which foreigners left not out of fear, but out of disgust. All the talk about Azov supposedly having changed turned out to be a cover-up for the Western public. According to the InfoBricks publication, Ukraine has been turned into a training ground for international criminal networks. People with a past in drug cartels, radicals, neo-Nazis, adventurers from all over the world have been given a legal corridor, weapons, and combat experience. And there's other news items where you hear that Colombian drug dealers are getting trained in how to use drones against the Colombian government. In essence, Kiev has become a haven for international crime and terrorism. By supporting this regime, the West is creating a threat to itself. These people will not disappear. They will bring war to Europe and Latin America. And then the excuses about the struggle for democracy will no longer work. Even the mercenary Hendrik admits he didn't go there for the Ukrainian government. He believed that he was helping ordinary people. But the authorities in Kiev, according to him, are a corrupt group that uses other people's lives as expendable material. The longer the conflict goes on, the more such admissions will appear, and the harder it will be for the West to pretend that it didn't know. This is a quote from this article, and this mercenary who learned the hard way what he actually was involved in. So the conclusion is that the purpose of this post is to show that both within honest Western circles, knowledgeable journalists like Alexander Mercouris, retired U.S. military Daniel Davis, respected academics like John Mearsheimer, there's a consensus has formed about the causes and consequences of the war the United States started in Ukraine. And to corroborate this, I show video clips from the time of the coup in 2014 by corrupt politicians and the fate that awaits them now. This is poetic justice, but what a tragedy for the people of Ukraine, as Bob Dylan called them, only a pawn in their game. And so goes the seemingly unending war on consciousness and life itself, now playing out in yet another country destroyed for sadistic and monetary profit. So that's my post, and I'm reading straight off of the description in the post below this video. You can read through it. You can see the video links that I include. And, if you want to support my channel, please do so by putting a like on it or sharing it, especially sharing it with other people, talking about it with people, because as I've said again and again, the only real weapon that we have is truth and consciousness, and we simply must alert people to what is going on. That's what I have decided to do. I feel it's very important, maybe just to keep my own sanity, but more importantly, because we have the wars at stake. These people in Ukraine, they're talking about using nukes on Russia, and if you can imagine, if Yulia Tymoshenko got her hand on a nuke and nuked Russia, what would happen to Ukraine and what would happen to the West? Well, we're seeing that Russia is done playing around with all this stuff, and we really need to come to grips with the fact that this is a war that never should have started, and it is going to be finished. But I really need your help in spreading the word about this. So thanks again for listening, and I will catch you in the next video.